I'm Cole, and I'm inspired by helping people see that data and the ability to communicate it is a superpower. And it's one that I think anyone can learn.
All right, and welcome to the Lantern Podcast out of Good Cause Productions, a show that is produced and promoted by students right here at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan Martin, and I am again super excited about our guest today. She's the CEO of Storytelling with Data, the author of several best-selling books, including Storytelling with Data, Storytelling with You, and a children's book titled Daphne Draws Data. For more than a decade, she and her team, including her husband Randy, who you've heard before on an earlier episode of this show, have delivered interactive learning sessions for individuals, companies, and philanthropic organizations all over the world. We are fortunate to have her and her husband Randy visit campus today, where they spoke to our students and faculty. Please welcome Cole Nussbaumer Knaflic.
So for me, the superpower is you have an idea that you want to communicate, right? It may have data and numbers involved in it, but it doesn't have to. I want people to understand all of the things that they can do to help that idea make sense to someone else, whether it's in their visual communications or in their verbal communications, like the words we actually say to get an idea across to others.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to back up. So people in the show know I'm a sucker for stories of like people finding their way. Like how do you go from, I know you majored in applied math.
That's
and
right.
How do you go from that to this? So can we start at the beginning
Sure.
tell me about your desire to study applied math?
Well, so math for me, I enjoyed because it was challenging and I love the logic that if you spend enough time with a math problem, you can figure it out. Right? And there's a right answer, or there are different strategies you can use to break things apart and put them back together in ways that make sense. So I studied at the University of Washington in Seattle, had my undergrad in applied math, went straight into banking out of that, working in credit risk management. So building statistical forecasting models, a lot of highly technical stuff. And I found when I was working there that I really enjoyed the communication part of the analysis process, where I would take all the complicated things I'd done and make them visual, make a graph, add some color, make it something that someone else could see, which would drive understanding and action in totally different ways. And it was interesting also because the aesthetic piece of designing a graph and maybe adding things to it or making it look cool, playing with fonts and colors, it was something that my colleagues at the time didn't do at all. And what I noticed was as I started playing with things and with what they looked like, that people started paying more attention to my work. And so it was this reinforcing cycle that I took through to my next job as well, which was at Google. So Google, I joined the people analytics team back in 2007, which was right as the team was forming, which meant it was small and I got to wear a lot of different hats. And one of the things I had the opportunity to do was to build a course on data visualization. So I'd become known as the person who was good at making graphs. And we were building out a training program for our people operations folks, sort of an MBA-like program. And I got asked to make a course on data visualization, which was fascinating because it meant I got to stop and read a bunch of books and start to understand why some of the things that I'd arrived at through trial and error over time were effective, understand how to teach some of those things to other people. And so it was a great place to pause and really understand something in depth in a way to be able to share it with others.
So how long were you at Google?
I was at Google from 2007 to 2012.
Okay.
Yeah, and had the opportunity there to travel all over. So we initially rolled the course that I taught out into this specific program, but there was such broad interest in it that we eventually rolled it out company-wide. And so I got to travel to different offices around the world, teaching people how to visualize data. And that was fascinating because I'd have engineers and salespeople sitting together side by side, people with totally different skill sets, different motivations for wanting to know how to do this. And I came to recognize that the skills that are useful in this space are broadly useful. They're not specific to a given role or industry, and they're really things that basically anyone can use to have greater impact in how they show and talk about their work.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because it feels like a significant transition in a lot of ways to move from applied math and working in the banking industry and then doing this and then teaching a course.
So for me, the intersection's always been being able to take the technical pieces and the business side and find where those overlap and help be the translator. Okay. And so being able to make things visual is such a useful way for helping everybody speak the same language and have smarter conversations as a result of that.
Huh. So I'm learning a bunch, and I have a whole bunch of things I want to talk to you about, just even about me and how I tell stories with data ultimately. But before, as we get there, I guess, so you're at Google for this time, you're getting this really good experience. What was it like kind of pivoting into teaching?
It was interesting. I had the fortune of taking a course at Google that was about teaching adult learners, right?
Okay.
Very different from teaching kids, for example. But, learning tricks like, if somebody takes out their phone, how you can move to that part of the room and change behaviors.
Yeah, an hour ago.
Yeah. We got to play with some of that during a guest lecture today. But for me, that was the fascinating part because I am an introvert. I'm a numbers person. My comfortable spot is behind my computer in a room by myself. But getting out early in my career and teaching on these topics, I think early what carried me through was just the passion. I was so excited about what I was talking about and the fact that other people wanted to listen, that carried things through for a bit until I could actually get adept at speaking. I can remember being so nervous and having shaking hands and not breathing deeply enough and having the shaking voice. But it was interesting because when I was at Google, it was over and over and over teaching these classes. And so I got a lot of reps in, and you can be really strategic about how you learn and refine and iterate when you're speaking with others. Because one of the things that I love, whether it's a one-on-one conversation like this or speaking in front of a room or a group of people, you get instant data in the form of people's reactions, their body language, their facial expressions, which means I can play with how I'm doing things and actually have that impact other people's behavior real time. And I find that fascinating. And I think it's interesting because a lot of times communication is glossed over as a soft skill. Particularly this is often, or I've heard this often in my background, coming up on a more technical side where people did not, if you were majoring in math or statistics, you did not invest in communication or take any classes there, right? That didn't seem like those things mixed. But you can be just as strategic when it comes to how you communicate as you can with how you work with numbers. And I think, again, that feedback loop is so interesting. And so I took the same approach that I took to learning how to visualize data and applied it to that next step of now, how do you interact with people and how do you get them to want to understand the thing that you want them to understand? And learned over time how the cadence of my voice or the volume or how I move about a space, and just started to understand how that can impact how my ideas come across to an audience, whether they are willing to be open to them and embrace them, how I can get people to ask questions or contribute to the conversation. And I have so much fun with that piece of things.
So that brought up two questions for me. But the first one is, I had the luxury of seeing a part of your teaching presentation today, which was fantastic. Your guest lecture to our students, which was fantastic.
Thank you.
And but I know one of the things you talked about there was it really felt like a big part of it is observing yourself, record yourself, watch yourself. Talk a little bit about that, about where you've had that experience, because I've also seen you present via your storytelling with data, you're on YouTube and things like that.
Yeah.
So I know that this is something you do a lot and take seriously.
It takes practice. And I think that's one of the myths that I want to dispel, because it's easy to look at a good speaker and say, oh, they probably were just naturally that way. That person's naturally a good storyteller. I don't think that's the case. Maybe there's some natural talent there, but I think for the most part, when we see someone who is really engaging in front of an audience, it's because they have put in the time to become that way. And that comes through practice. So I am a huge advocate of practicing out loud. I think is hugely useful because it forces you to articulate the transitions between your slides or your thoughts and ideas. I'm never a fan of memorizing, but I do recommend committing to memory certain points of what you want to get across. And so I'll often give an example of, if I'm getting ready to do a podcast and we're recording live like this with video, so I can't have notes in front of me, I won't memorize the intro, but I'll know there are these 5 different points I want to hit. And then I'm known to walk around my neighborhood and talk out loud to myself. What I'm doing is just I'm rehearsing, I'm practicing, and I'm finding different ways to navigate across those 5 points, so that by the time I get into the situation, and maybe if there are little nerves involved, I've got multiple different paths in my brain to be able to use to get eloquently, hopefully, from one to the next.
So you said something really interesting to me a moment ago when you were talking about communication, and you said, when I'm talking to someone, I get data back.
Yeah.
And for me, I realized, I guess I want to know, how do you define data?
For me, data is any sort of information you're getting about the world around you. So when I say I'm collecting data when I'm speaking to others, I'm watching facial expressions and seeing, do people look happy, like they like being here? Or do I see furrowed brows that might mean, oh, I need to back up and explain something, or maybe prompt for some questions because there might be confusion that I want to address. Or body language is another bit of data that we can get real time. Are people looking disengaged? They're leaning back, or are they sitting up? They're perky and paying attention. And I can decide in the moment and this is where practice is useful, because if I know roughly what I'm going to say, it leaves some mind share open to be able to really be in the moment, be making some of these observations, and then maybe decide to do something different as a result of that.
I'm asking because, given your background in math, I think a lot of people hear storytelling with data and they assume that with data we're talking about numbers.
And we often are. Yeah. And that is, that's the core of our business. That's really what we're known for. But a lot of the same principles that we're applying when it comes to designing a good graph really cover any sort of visual communications. And really there are 2 pieces to that puzzle. There's what you show and how you show it. And so, you want to think about things when it is data that you're communicating, of how do you make a graph that's going to make sense, not for you or for the analysis you did, but for your audience. And to know that, you need to know who your audience is, what you want them to know or do. We often teach about decluttering, so identifying what visual elements are there that don't need to be. How do you get comfortable stripping those away? Focusing attention where you want your audience to look in a graph or on a slide. So that means using visual contrast strategically, using color sparingly to draw attention can be really useful. And then not just showing a graph, but really taking people through a journey. And this is where the storytelling comes in. And when we talk about stories in my books or in our workshops, it's really story. Like, think back to books you read as a child or movies that you've seen. And we often use the narrative arc as a structure for teaching. It's nice because a lot of business scenarios map pretty easily against it, where you start off with a plot, then tension is introduced. That tension builds in the form of a rising action. Then there's a falling action and a resolution. And so we can think about our data stories or the things we want to communicate more generally in this structure, where the plot is the context. What does my audience need to know in order to be ready for what I'm going to communicate? Then the tension. What is at stake? What matters to them? And if I can make them aware of that tension that exists and build it to the appropriate point, then the resolution becomes, how does my audience act in a way that's going to resolve that tension? It's a very different approach to how business presentations are often done, which is more of a linear, we did this, then we did that, then we did the other thing. Let me take you along my whole process, which for the most part is not what an audience wants. It's really thinking about how we can take our audience on that journey. And so part of it is the graph or the slide deck that we're presenting. But then the other important piece is the storyteller, right? The person, whether they're presenting or by virtue of the details that they put around it to be consumed on its own. And so people often come to us, or organizations come to us for the data storytelling piece. But I think a lot of times what individuals walk away with is maybe a greater understanding or appreciation of the role that they play and how they can focus on just their own interpersonal skills in a way that will help everything be stronger.
So let's talk about storytelling with data, because we've talked around it quite a bit. But I'm curious, you're at Google. At some point, you decide I want to go do something on my own.
Yeah. So at Google, I had the opportunity to speak at a couple of conferences, and then from that, got calls to go into other organizations. Who were like, we've heard that you teach this. Come teach us as well. And that was when I really realized that these skills weren't needed at Google alone. Rather, pretty much anybody, so many people across so many different roles and industries touch data or are meant to use data in some fashion. And no one really teaches us how to do that well. And it really is a lot of foundational sort of skills that anyone can learn to be able to make a graph that makes sense. So it was 15 years ago now, which is crazy to think, that I left Google and started storytelling with data, where I characterize what we do as helping people and organizations make graphs that make sense, but also going beyond the data and really thinking about the story that we want to tell with it and how we can use that to get someone's attention, to build their understanding about something new or in a new way, and then ultimately to motivate them to act in some smarter fashion. So we do that through our books. I've written a number of books. We do workshops where we go in, we spend half a day or a day with a team really getting into the lessons and showing them applied and applying them in real time. And then we have all the things that go along to support that, a blog and a podcast and videos and a community.
Excellent. And I've seen the books and I've listened to the podcast. All of that is fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. What would you want, I guess, students to know about whether it's storytelling, whether it's data, whether it's kind of the next steps for their life? What are some of those things?
Oh, that's a big question. I think I'll go back to a piece of advice that I got from my mother when I was in college. It was my third year, so junior year. I was majoring in math, and I went to one of these panel discussions. It was, what do you do with a math degree? And I only remember the actuary and remember thinking how much I did not want to be an actuary, right? Because they're taking tests every couple years, and it felt very anxiety producing for me. And so I left that session so uninspired. And I went to my mom and said, I don't know about the math degree, Mom. It's like, architecture sounds kind of interesting. And her best advice ever to me was finish the math degree. And now that's not to say that people should go get a math degree, but rather I think just pick something and finish what you start. Because I have talked to so many people who are so afraid of picking the right thing that they don't pick anything. And then years go by and it's hard to kind of get back into something. And so I think just setting your sights on something and seeing it through. And when you do that, opportunities will find you. And then it's just a matter of being open to them and putting yourself in some, I like the term productive discomfort, right? If we're too comfortable, then we're not learning. I think back to my own path. My comfortable spot as an introvert would have been in a room by myself, behind my computer. But if I'd stayed there, I wouldn't have been able to have nearly the impact. And so pushing yourself in ways that maybe push you outside of your comfort zone and picking something and finishing it.
It's funny. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, we're talking about how some of the skills you have as a presenter and things like that, how broadly applicable they are.
Yeah.
What are the elements you would say from your math background that feel really broadly applicable that helped you be successful? Yeah.
I think as I look back, the logic, one of the reasons I was drawn to math, but I think also one of the things that was reinforced for me through it and through the computer programming and other courses that I took alongside it was just this ability to take something that might start out as an ambiguous sort of situation or problem and be comfortable and confident that I could break that down into pieces that were manageable and I could solve one piece at a time and then bring those things back together in a way that makes sense to me and that I then learned how to communicate in a way that makes sense to other people. So it's really this kind of puzzle solving sort of mentality that I think has helped me navigate a lot of spaces where others might have felt uncomfortable because I was okay going in and having things be undefined and being able to bring definition to them and solve something as a result of that.
Oh, that's fascinating. I'm always intrigued by the things people take from their studies that aren't necessarily directly applicable to whatever they studied, but end up serving them in all these other ways, right?
Yeah.
And so, I was trained as a counseling psychologist, and what I discovered is all of the skills that I developed as a counseling psychologist were helpful to me as a teacher. Then in some ways, those things are very similar enterprises in all these different ways. So I'm curious, before we get to our three questions, I've got another question for you about presenting data.
Okay.
So I'm a social scientist. I love data. I make a lot of data-driven decisions. I regularly find, though, that other people are not quite as enthralled with data as I am.
Yeah.
And I'm from talking to you so far, I suspect that part of what I've done is that I am not necessarily approaching my audience where they're at the way I need to. But I'm curious, what advice would you have for people who are sort of data-driven themselves, but sometimes struggle finding an audience for that?
This is interesting. So we could take this in a lot of different directions. And it's funny you say, because you would think that I would be the more data-driven in my relationship, but I use data at work. I'm not a big data collector when it comes to like what movie to watch. This is my husband and I have back and forth about this because he wants to read every review, wants to like go through all the different data, wants to know that other people value it before and I don't care at all. I'd rather just like pick the thing and watch it and decide for myself whether I like it or not. But I think for the data-driven person who's not found their audience, there's such value just in surrounding yourself or putting yourself in situations where you're going to be with people who are very different than you are and just being curious and asking questions. Because I think a lot of us operate from the assumption that everybody is like us and everybody thinks the way that we do. And that's where a lot of misunderstandings come from. So the more you can open yourself up to realize that different people come in with a whole set of lifelong of different experiences. They might look at things in different ways. They may have totally different values, and get an understanding of that will help you understand how you might still be able to use your data-driven approach, but you might come at it differently as a result of this new understanding. And it just makes all of these different spaces where you can form personal connections with people. Because really, at the end of the day, no matter what it is in the business world, personal life, data's one piece of things maybe, but data's never the thing that makes the decision. It's always going to be a person who does that piece. And so the more you can relate to people, the more you will have success, whether it's data you're trying to convince them with or anything else.
I love that. That's really, really helpful to me. And I think the other piece that I've been thinking a lot about today, as I've listened to you and Randy, is that storytelling piece. I think maybe where I have a blind spot is I know what what story it's telling me, and maybe I'm not communicating that story as effectively as I need to other people.
Well, and thinking about what role your audience plays in that, so that it's not you communicating the data for your story, but if they can have a central role in that, then they're going to naturally be engaged because you've made it about them.
Yeah, that is amazing. Thank you very much for that. Three questions. One is, who do you hope you are inspiring?
I hope I'm inspiring anyone who works with data, who's felt frustrated because people aren't seeing their work in the way that they want, and maybe have shared some tips today, or if not today, then more broadly through the work that we're doing with storytelling with data to help people communicate their data and their projects in ways that gets their message across and is understood by others. I also hope to inspire people who maybe are afraid of data a little bit or intimidated by it. It doesn't need to be a scary thing. And there are so many other facets of how you communicate and present that have nothing to do with the data, as we've talked about, that are other places to invest in ways that will be useful.
That is really great. What is a piece of art, whether it's a movie, TV show, book, something like that, that transformed you or inspired you that you want to share with others?
This is an interesting question. I couldn't come up with something that has been life-changing. However, when I thought back over movies and books, and I think the one movie I have seen more than any other was as a child. I had a VHS recording of The Karate Kid.
Excellent.
And so I thought back, and I actually think Daniel LaRusso and all of his practicing, right? The wax on, wax off, day after day, to create mastery of his karate in that instance. I think some of that must have seeped in because practicing is so central to everything I do, whether it's practicing to refine a graph or a slide, practicing how I speak and carry myself, that I think that practice and the work ethic has come through in my life.
Do you know that is the only movie that I saw that movie 2 days in a row at the theater, which is really unusual for me. I am sort of a serial movie watcher, at least I was when I was a kid, but never twice in a row at a theater. So yeah,
I think I've probably seen it several hundred times.
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic. Have you watched the show,
movie.
like the
I did, yeah,
Cobra
yeah,
Kai? I think
yeah,
it's called.
yeah.
Excellent.
Johnny's back, yeah.
Yes, very good. Nice. All right. What's a piece of advice that you would want to share with people who haven't yet found their way?
So, I mean, I think I'll underscore the advice I gave earlier, which is just like pick the thing and finish it. I'll also call on something when I was talking to some students earlier. A gentleman asked, what do you do when you can't start something?
I loved your answer for this. This was great. Yeah.
I love when I get a question that I've never had before, and that doesn't happen super often because I've been talking about these topics for so long, but I've never had that question before. And so I shared an anecdote of how I have a really hard time. Actually, I love notebooks, blank paper notebooks, and I have a really hard time starting writing in a notebook for fear of what I put on that first page, that it like feels really heavy and like it's critical, which of course it isn't. But I gave the recommendation to start with sticky notes because they are more disposable in a way that feels less committing. And actually, I have many notebooks that are filled with sticky notes where I've actually not written on the pages, but done sticky notes instead. And so I think if anyone's feeling stuck or like you haven't found your way, one, talk to people about that, because sometimes we imagine ourselves into this scenario where we are the only ones facing this thing. But oftentimes when you start expressing that to others, you'll find that other people have either been there or might be going through something similar currently. And so I think there are a lot of great connections that can be made through that. But I'll also recommend the tool of a small Post-it note or sticky note of just brainstorm, right? If you don't know what to do next, write some options of what you could do next, and then take a look at those and maybe organize them and talk to other people about them. And you may just find that you come up with a plan or some ideas to try that'll help you get over that fear of, it being quote unquote the right thing, but just making forward progress on something.
Your timing here is great. I've been feeling lately like I've gotten too far away from some physical, like sort of
Post-it
media,
notes are
right?
great for that.
Post-it notes, notebooks.
Yeah.
I feel like I do a little too much online, and there's an
I love the analog because it slows us down in really useful ways, because that space creates time and place for critical thinking.
Right. Yeah. Is there anything I should have asked about storytelling with data that I didn't? Anything you want to talk about?
I think we've covered a lot in a really short time. I'll just mention that if anyone listening would like more details on anything we've talked about, storytellingwithdata.com is a great place to start.
And if they want to find out more about you, LinkedIn, any place they
LinkedIn,
can...
I'm there. That'd probably be the best place.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you so very much for being here, Cole. This has been great.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan.
All right. I am back now with Camilla Doherty. How are you, Camilla?
I'm doing great, Ryan. How are you?
I'm good. You know what's fun is that we recorded the other thing with you just about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And now we're pretending like it's been 2 weeks.
It has been 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking
And
about.
we're both just wearing the same exact
Yep.
thing. Yes. And okay, so here's what I want to talk about this time. You are in a relatively unique position. I know things can't be relatively unique, but we're just going to pretend that that works. We're in a relatively unique position right now because you have been a student at UW Green Bay. You were a student employee at UW Green Bay, and now you have worked at UW Green Bay in 2 different capacities, right? Because you worked for the business school for a little while and now you're back working for us. So here is my question for you. When you think about some of the experiences you had as a student at UW Green Bay, what are some of the things that you did as a student that really helped prepare you for this job or even for the job in the business school?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the position in the cause office as a student, social media manager, when I
Okay.
came in, I had relatively no experience
Okay.
social media, and that position, I learned so much in such a short amount of time, and I feel like those skills are really valued in the job market nowadays, so it really prepared me. Also, within the Sheepshead Review and Teaching Press, I was publicity director in there, so I got to sort of do more of a book market.
Yeah. So it sounds like the opportunity to kind of get those quote unquote real world experiences, not a super popular phrase on campus. We like to believe that what's happening here is also the real world. But still, like getting those, applied experiences were the things that helped really prepare you. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I hope students will take note of that, right? That getting those types of things, whether it's internships, practicums, student employment,
Yeah.
those types of experiences.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why we have this show, is that so for people like you when you were a student, for people like Kennedy, who was our former who's graduated, who was our former, producer, Gus, who is in the office right now, doing the work. So all of that. So yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Are you ready to take us home?
I'm ready.
In a single take,
In a single
which
take.
we are known for. Excellent. Here we go.
The Lantern is brought to you by Good Cause Productions at the University of Wisconsin Green Bay. The executive producer is Ryan Martin, and the production manager is Amanda Wildenberg. The engineer for today's episode is Gus Schusler, with support from Justin Cavally of our Media Arts and Production program. And that music you love so much was arranged by our very own Michelle McQuaid-Dewhurst. Special thanks also to our guest Cole Nussbaumer Knaflic. If you haven't already, please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. Keep being amazing.